The month of March is finally here, and I am back with another March Madness Bracketology video where we take a look at the updated NCAA Tournament projections and predict how it would play out if it were to start today. And now that we are so close to the tournament actually starting, I'll be doing these videos with each update that is made to the Bracketology projections. But before we get into this one, if you enjoy the content, please consider dropping a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. But now, let's jump into it. And as always, we are back on ESPN taking a look at Joe Lunardi's updated bracketology for this year's NCAA tournament. And starting off with our top overall seed, it's still the Duke Blue Devils, who remain the #1 overall seed in the tournament after dominating Virginia and NC State since the last update. The last team in is Indiana still, and they remain in the field even after that home loss to Michigan State they took. And then we have Auburn as our first team out, who even has an almost 500 record, so they're still in the bubble picture somehow. But then getting into our bracket, we have St. Louis, who has dropped down to an 8 seed, and Iowa's dropped down to a 9 seed after their recent losses. You have UCF, who moved up to the 8 line, but could be dropping after that loss they just took to Oklahoma State. You have NC State, who dropped to a 9 seed after they have lost 5 of their last 6 games. Gonzaga is now down to a 4 seed after their loss on the road at St. Mary's. We have Ohio State, who is up to an 11 seed and in the field after that big win against Purdue. New Mexico has re-entered the bracket after their huge conference win against San Diego State. Iowa State's down a seed to the 3 line after they have suffered back-to-back losses. We got Villanova down to a 7 seed after that blowout loss to St. John's. TCU, a team that I've liked recently, they moved up to a 10 seed and could be moving even more with the next update after their road win they just picked up at Texas Tech. Michigan and State and Houston both jump to the 2 line, and with all the movement around, Michigan State is just definitely benefiting with playing some really good basketball right now, and Houston bounced back after that 3-game losing streak they had. You got Clemson and Missouri, who are matched up and both have moved up a seed line. Kentucky moved up to the 6 seed, and Texas A&M dropped to the 11 seed, but they just had a game where Texas A&M actually was able to get the win over the Wildcats. Then you got Purdue, who is no longer a 2 seed. They're down to a 3 seed after that road loss to Ohio State, and they've been struggling as of late. And then St. Mary's up to a 7 seed after that huge win against Gonzaga. And then lastly, we got UCLA, who moves down to a 10 seed and is now back in the bubble conversation. And speaking of the bubble, looking at our last 4 byes, we have SMU, TCU, UCLA, Texas A&M. Our last 4 in is Santa Clara, Ohio State, New Mexico, and Indiana. So Indiana's still just in. First 4 out is Auburn, San Diego State dropped out, VCU dropped out, and Virginia Tech. And then our next 4 out is USC, Cal, who was our first team out of the field in our last update. They're now in the next 4 out, and then 2 Big 12 teams in West Virginia and Cincinnati. And then looking at our conferences real quick, we have the Big 10 and SEC tied with 10 teams in the field. We got the ACC and Big 12 tied with 8 teams in the field. West Coast and Big East both have 3 teams, and then the Mountain West have 2 teams. But now let's go ahead and put this in our bracket and make our predictions. All right, so starting off in the East region, we have the #1 overall seeded Duke Blue Devils taking on Central Arkansas. And if you have watched Duke recently, you know just how good they have been playing. They're #1 in the country in the AP poll, top 2 in most metrics as well, and there's just no way they're losing to Central Arkansas on this one, so I got Duke moving on. Then we have St. Louis and Iowa, both teams that have lost a few games recently. St. Louis, after losing only 1 game for the majority of the season, has now lost 2 of their last 4, but I still like this Billiken team. Josh Schertz has this team rolling for most of the season. They're great on the offense and defensive end, really effective with the way they shoot it. They have multiple guys that can bomb it from 3. And then with Iowa, it's really just Bennett Sturts out there for Ben McCollum's group. I think St. Louis has had a great season so far, and even though they struggled as of late, I think they can overcome that and still win against the Hawkeyes, so give me St. Louis to advance. Then we have Tennessee taking on Yale. Yale has just been a steady presence there in the Ivy League and seems to be in the NCAA tournament time and time again. A few years ago, they were able to knock off Auburn in the first round and advance to the round of 32, but in this one against Tennessee, I think the size is going to give them trouble that Tennessee has. Nate Ament did suffer an injury, so he isn't 100%, but I still think he would play great in this game against Yale. You also have Jacoby Gillespie, who's been back on track, and they just have a lot of size there with the Volunteers, so I have Tennessee advancing in this game. And then we have Gonzaga taking on UNC Wilmington. And Gonzaga, I've mentioned this time and time again, it doesn't look like Braden Huff is going to be back. And without Braden Huff, Gonzaga's ceiling is definitely limited from what it would be with him in. You also have Graham Ike, though, who is a huge presence down low. But they're playing a UNC Wilmington team that is not like a lot of other mid-majors. UNC Wilmington is massive. They're the 10th tallest team in the country. And their smallest starter is only 6'5". So they actually might be bigger than Gonzaga in this matchup. They also really try and attack mismatches. They have Patrick Wessler down there, a 7-footer that can anchor the paint for them and try and match up with Graham Ike. I think this wouldn't be as easy as a lot of people think, and I actually believe I'm going to be picking UNC Wilmington to pick up the upset over Gonzaga. If the Zags had Braden Huff, I think it would be a completely different story, but I really like UNC Wilmington. They've been one of the teams I've been looking at as one of my upset picks in the first round, and this matchup is just something I really like for them. So I got UNC Wilmington moving on to the round of 32 to face Tennessee. Then we have Louisville or Santa Clara or Ohio State. In that Santa Clara versus Ohio State matchup, I'm actually going to be taking the Buckeyes. I do like Santa Clara a lot, but Ohio State just picked up a big win over Purdue. You got Bruce Thornton, who's going to be making his NCAA tournament appearance, which is really weird to say, but you also have John Mobley, who just feels like a guard that's built for March for the Buckeyes. And they have a bunch of other pieces as well, like Devin Royal. And Louisville, we know what they can do on the offensive end, but it hasn't looked the same like it did previously in the season. Michael Brown Jr. has been struggling a little bit. So has Ryan Comwell. I'm just not fully convinced on Louisville right now. Earlier on in the year, I would have been, but I got to go with Ohio State in this matchup to get the 11-6 upset. Then moving on to Iowa State versus North Dakota State. Iowa State took a tough loss on the road at Arizona. Really wasn't a matchup that I thought would have gone that way. I thought Iowa State actually would have put up a fight against the Wildcats, but they were no match for Arizona in that one, which gets me a little concerned going into March because originally I had them as a team I thought could win the title, but their ceiling to me is starting to go back and back a little bit. However, in this matchup versus North Dakota State, I don't think they would have too much trouble, so I got Iowa State advancing. Then we have Villanova at the 7 seed taking on TCU. Villanova's had a great season so far, although in their most recent game against St. John's, they got blown out, which is definitely concerning. Then you got a TCU team that definitely took their worst loss of the season in the very first game against New Orleans, but now they have some of the best wins in the country. They just beat a Texas Tech team on the road. They got a win over Florida, a win over Wisconsin. Some really good wins on the resume for the Horned Frogs, and I think they would get another one here and beat Villanova. Then Michigan State going up against Wright State. Michigan State has had a really good season, probably the second best team right now outside of Michigan in the Big Ten. I don't think Wright State would have the bodies to go up against Tom Izzo's team. And I have the Sparty moving on to the round of 32. Then we have Duke versus St. Louis. I think this would be a really fun matchup. Robbie Avila is a really fun story for St. Louis. They have a lot of guys around him as well. I like Kellen Thames a lot. I believe they have 5 guys that average over 10 points, 7 that average over 9, and they have a 9-man rotation so they can go deep. But Duke can go deep into their bench as well, and we know that they have Cameron Boozer, and from that power forward position, I just don't think anybody's gonna be able to match up with Cameron Boozer well, and I think Boozer will be able to have his way. You also have Isaiah Evans that's playing extremely well. You have a couple other dudes that's been stepping up even more for Duke, and it just seems like as the season has progressed, they've just gotten better and better. So I have Duke advancing to the Sweet 16. Then Tennessee taking on UNC Wilmington, and Although I definitely think Tennessee would be favored in this one, I'm actually going with the upset in UNC Wilmington to make it a little different. I just really like the size that this team has. It's a lot different than what we see from most mid-majors, and so when Power 5 schools are going to be matching up against them, it's not going to be like they're going to be able to have their way in the paints. I think the only real weakness for them is their pace, but when you go up against a team like Tennessee who doesn't necessarily play at the fastest pace, I believe UNC Wilmington's going to be able to take advantage of that. And I also just like what they do from the defensive perspective as well. They have the size, and I just like this matchup for the Seahawks. So give me UNC Wilmington. Moving on to the Sweet 16. Ohio State versus Iowa State. I definitely think the Buckeyes could contend in this one, and actually they probably could get the upset with the way Iowa State's playing right now, but I just have a little too much trust in the Cyclones. I don't think they're just not going to make it to the second weekend of this tournament. They've had a great season so far, and although they've struggled in some games recently, I just can't doubt them as of yet. So I'm still going with Iowa State to advance over Ohio State. And then TCU versus Michigan State. I truly just think Sparty's playing too good right now, and it doesn't look like there are many teams that can compete with them. I think that defense would be a problem for a TCU team that isn't necessarily known for their offense, and Jeremy Fears Jr. is just going to be facilitating that ball to everyone. I also like Michigan State's size in this matchup against TCU, so I have the Spartans advancing. So in our Sweet 16, the first matchup is Duke versus UNC Wilmington, and this is where the run for the Seahawks come to an end. Duke, although UNC Wilmington has all that size, I think Duke has the same amount of size and even more. They also just have weapons at every single position in the Blue Devils and John Shire. Move on to the Elite Eight once again, where they'll be facing up against Michigan State, who I have beating Iowa State in that matchup. Originally, I would have picked the Cyclones, but with how Michigan State has handled themselves in their games recently beat a Purdue team that was preseason #1 in the country, have also picked up a lot of other great wins over the likes of Illinois and others. Like, this Michigan State team has been playing great, and I think they make it to the Elite Eight this season if this were to be the bracket. And then who do I have coming out of this region? It's got to be the Duke Blue Devils with the way they've been playing. I just cannot go against Duke with how they've been playing so far. #1 team in the country for a reason. Analytically, a top 2 team in the country for a reason. There are just too many weapons. We already saw this game earlier. The rematch, I think it would go the same. Duke won at Michigan State the first time. Duke wins on a neutral court the second time and advances to the Final Four once again. All right, moving down to the South region, we have the UConn Huskies as the #1 overall seed in this one. And in their first round matchup, they're taking on either Long Island or UMBC as the 16 seed. And much like Duke, I don't think the Huskies are going to have any issues with this. I got UConn moving on to the second round. Then we have Miami taking on Georgia. Miami, a team that I do like. I think they've played really well in Jay Lucas's first year as the head coach there in the ACC, and it's nice to see them back in the NCAA tournament. But they're going up against a Georgia team which was struggling, but then just picked up a really big win against Alabama, and in that one were able to get their offense going. And that's kind of what I've mentioned before. If Georgia's able to get their offense going like they were in the early part of the season, this Georgia team can score with anyone in the country, it seems. And so in this one, because of that win against Alabama, and I feel like it might be able to get their offense back into a rhythm, I'm actually going to be picking Georgia to win this one to move on to the second round. Then you have Arkansas taking on South Florida. Arkansas, we know what they have with Darius Acuff and Malik Thomas, but I do think they need more from that front court of Trevin Brazile, Malik Ewan, Nick Pringle. You also have Billy Richmond, who needs a shout out because he's been playing awesome as of late. They really need to get Carter Knox back, but we'll have to wait and see. And the depth, I think, could be an issue for them, but not necessarily in the first round. But they are going up against a South Florida team that I do like out of the American. You have Wes Ennis and Joseph Pinion, who are really great shooters for them. This is kind of like the Alabama of the mid-majors. They're fast, they shoot a high volume, they crash the offensive boards. They also have a guy like Isaiah Nelson on their team, who is most likely going to be the American Player of the Year. He's a double-double machine, elite defender. Honestly, he's an NBA prospect for next season. I think South Florida is a really strong first-round upset pick for a lot of matchups that they could have here in the 12, maybe even get to an 11 seed range with this team. But I don't think Arkansas is one of them. I trust Darius Acuff too much. I think he's going to get the Razorbacks into the second round of this tournament. Then we got Texas Tech taking on Stephen F. Austin. Texas Tech now without JT Toppin, who's out for the rest of the year with that ACL injury, but the Red Raiders were able to go on the road and win at Iowa State without JT Toppin. One of the things I've mentioned with this team with that injury is going to be they're going to need guys around Christian Anderson to step up, and they have. Donovan Outwell looks like one of the best shooters in the country. You have a guy like Jamal Mosley who stepped up, Lawan Watts, Luke Mboye. A lot of different pieces are stepping up for this Red Raiders team. And I think this team might have a higher ceiling than I originally thought. Originally, I thought it was the Sweet 16, but now with the way some of these other guys are playing, I could see the Red Raiders maybe making it to an Elite 8, maybe even a Final 4. I do think Christian Anderson is that good of a player that can help and make a lot of these guys around him better. And they're going up against a Stephen F. Austin team that I do like, but with what I've seen from Texas Tech so far, even without JT Toppin, I think they're going to be able to get past Stephen F. Austin. Then we got BYU going up against Texas A&M. BYU right now without Richie Saunders seems to be in a free fall. You obviously have AJ Dubbanza. You know what you're going to get from him, 20-plus points per game, but they need others around him to step up. You obviously have Robert Wright. Kennard Davis really hasn't been the X factor that I wanted and thought he would be. Keba Keita. Just a lot of guys around them that can do things, but they just aren't right now, and they're going to need them to do something if they want to make any noise at all in the NCAA tournament. And then a Texas A&M team that have been dropping a lot of games in the SEC as well. They had started really hot in the conference, but slowed down as of late. But they did just pick up that big win against Kentucky, which could give them some momentum heading into March. But I think I'm still going to go with BYU and AJ Dubbanza. Similar to Arkansas with Darius Acuff, I have too much trust in Dubbanza to get past this first round matchup and into the second round. So give me the Cougars to advance. Then Purdue as the 3 seed, Troy as the 14 seed. Purdue dropping down to a 3 seed is really surprising. I mean, it makes sense with what they've been doing as of late, losing on the road in Ohio State in their last matchup. But Purdue just feels like they have the talent to be a 2 seed, not a 1 seed anymore with what they've done, but this was the preseason #1 team in the country for a reason. You have the returners in Braden Smith, Trey Coppin-Wren, Fletcher Lawyer, all guys that have made it to a national championship game with the Purdue Boilermakers. You brought in guys like Oscar Clough. You have a lot of other weapons, CJ Cox, Jakari Harris, a lot of other guys. It just hasn't really come together, especially on the defensive end. Going up against a Troy team, they're going to be undersized. I don't know if they have anyone that's going to be able to match up with Oscar Clough and Trey Coffman-Wren, so I do have Purdue winning this one. But right now, the way Purdue season's going, it's not as up as I thought it would be. But then 7 versus 10 matchup of Utah State taking on UCLA. UCLA got that big win against Illinois with the Donovan Dent buzzer-beating layup in overtime, going up against one of the best mid-majors in the country in the Utah State Aggies. I like Utah State a lot. I really like Mason Falslev. I think UCLA is trending a bit in the right direction, although they did drop a seed in the most recent update. This is really a 50-50 pick'em game for me, so I think I'm going with the higher seed. I'm going with Utah State to get this one. And then Florida versus Merrimack. I have to go with Florida. Florida, as I've mentioned, continues to look like the hottest team in the country. Back-to-back 100-point games for the Gators. You got the front court playing great. Earlier on, it was obviously Thomas Houck, but then Ruben Chenyulu was the name to watch for Florida as he was being a double-double machine and grabbing every board, and he's still been great. But the past couple of games, it's been Alex Condon stepping up, and when you just have guys all over the lineup that can step up for this team, and then you have a backcourt that's continuing to improve. Also, shooting 36% from 3 in the month of February, the Gators did. This team is just looking like they're getting back to what we thought they were going to be originally. I have the Gators advancing to the round of 32. Then jumping back up to the top, we see UConn, we see Georgia. This could be a high scoring affair. We know that Georgia can score, as I've mentioned, but you also have UConn, who at times looks like they play no defense, but they can still score with the best of them. I like the matchup on the interior for UConn with Taurus Reed. I really like what they have with Silas Demery Jr., who with each and every game just feels like he's getting more and more comfortable in this Danny Hurley offense. You saw Alex Caravan will this team to a win against Seton Hall. I just really like what UConn has. I don't think they're not going to get to the second weekend, so give me UConn advancing to the Sweet 16. Then we have Arkansas taking on Texas Tech. And originally, with the news of JT Toppin being out, this was Arkansas all day. And we actually saw this game earlier in the year where Arkansas was able to pull out the win. But with the depth issues we've been seeing from Arkansas, and then what I've seen from Texas Tech, I know they just took a loss to TCU at home. I'm actually going to be picking the Red Raiders to get revenge in this one. In the first neutral site matchup, it was Arkansas, but next time, Grant McCasland, one of the best coaches in the country with what he's doing with Texas Tech right now, I think they're going to be game planned, going to be ready, and the Red Raiders are going to win and advance to the Sweet 16. Then we got BYU versus Purdue, and a lot of the 6 seeds, I might be picking them over Purdue, but BYU is not one of them. I have the Boilermakers. Right now, BYU is just struggling. They're struggling to find a rhythm, find cohesiveness without Richie Saunders, and I think that would continue. But then we got Utah State up against Florida, and this front court is going to be way too much for Utah State to handle. I do like them in that first round matchup, but Florida advances to the Sweet 16. Then we have UConn taking on Texas Tech in this one. And with JT Toppin, I'd probably be picking Texas Tech. But without JT Toppin, I'm not sure who's going to stack up against Taurus Reed. I think he might be able to have his way and have a big one. You also have the shooters to match Texas Tech with Braylon Mullins, with Solo Ball if he can get going, Alex Caravan. I just think Danny Hurley is getting UConn back to the Elite Eight once again. And then Purdue taking on Florida. Purdue has a good front court with Oscar Clough and Trey Kaufman-Renn, but they are not the caliber that Florida is. I think the backcourt for Florida, they've been playing better. Xavier Lee, Boogie Flan, Urban Clavzar still remains a big piece. Isaiah Brown, another guy that has stepped up. I think he has been crucial for them on the wing, allowing Thomas Houck to play more at the 4 at times. I just really like what he's been doing for Florida as of late. I'm getting the Gators to the Elite Eight. And then in that Elite Eight matchup between UConn and Florida, which would be a rematch from what we saw earlier in the year where UConn won. In this one, Florida is getting their revenge and advancing to the Final Four to face Duke. Now jumping on over to the Midwest region where we see Michigan taking on either Howard or Bethune-Cookman in their first round matchup. And Michigan, although they are second in the country to Duke, they are number 1 in a lot of analytics. And much like all the other 1 seeds, they are just too good and will not be losing to a 16 seed this season. Then you have UCF going up against NC State. Both of these teams are struggling or coming off losses recently. NC State losing 5 of their last 6. UCF just came off a loss to Oklahoma State. I think UCF has been the surprise out of the Big 12, but you got a guy like Themis Folks for Johnny Dawkins, who's been playing great there in the guard position. NC State, they got Quadir Copeland. You have a lot of other pieces like Darion Williams. They have guys and they can shoot it and score at a high rate. I just think recently they've been sliding a lot. However, I'm still sticking with Will Wade and the Wolfpack to get this win over UCF. UCF has been able to beat really good teams, but they've been at home like Kansas and Texas Tech. I think on a neutral floor, NC State's going to be able to perform better and get the win and move on to the second round. Next, we got Vanderbilt as the 5 seed, taking on Liberty as the 12 seed. And Vanderbilt started off the season hot, 16-0 under Mark Byington, but really once they got into the thick of SEC play, they started struggling and have been dropping slowly but surely down the rankings and the seedings. They're going up against a Liberty team out of the Conference USA. This team is elite on the offensive end. They're one of the best shooting teams, especially from deep, but they are very small, second smallest nationally. They have a stud in Zach Cleveland, though, in the interior. I think this team, though, has a shot of beating Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, not known for their positional size either. And so I think Liberty isn't going to have big size concerns like they would against a lot of Power 5 schools. They also bring that shooting. They have 2 guards, though, that are sub 6 feet, but then you got Tyler Tanner from Vanderbilt that's also a guard that's listed as 6 foot, but could be shorter than that. I think the size is not going to be an issue at all, and I think Liberty has what it takes to pull off this upset with the way Vanderbilt's playing currently. So I'm picking the Flames to get the upset and advance to the round of 32. Then we got Virginia taking on California Baptist. Virginia was what I thought the second best team in the ACC was. Then they went on the road at Duke and just got absolutely blown out by the Blue Devils. And although I think it definitely says more about how good Duke is than how bad Virginia is, Virginia just was not ready for the level of physicality that was in that game, which is something that is a bit concerning for me as we get further into the tournament. In this first round matchup against Cal Baptist, I'm not too concerned about that, but I do think Virginia, that could be something that hurts them later on down the road. Then we have North Carolina taking on New Mexico or Indiana. I think originally I had Indiana winning in the first 4, but with what I've seen recently, this team has been struggling and they'll be lucky to even make the tournament, honestly. So in that matchup, I'm picking New Mexico out of the Mountain West. New Mexico also just got a huge win over San Diego State, which really helps them as an at-large candidate, and I believe New Mexico will be in the field once it's released. But they'll be going up against a North Carolina team that should have Caleb Wilson back, and North Carolina has been winning games without Caleb Wilson. Just picked up a big one against Clemson recently without him, and they've just been rolling, honestly. And I think this might actually help North Carolina get a lot of other guys more confidence and more playing time. And then when Caleb Wilson's able to get back into this lineup, they might have even more guys that can contribute and help around him. So I got the Tar Heels advancing. Then Nebraska taking on UC Irvine. UC Irvine, a very interesting and intriguing mid-major to look at as one of the maybe ones that could pick off an upset. They definitely have a more defensive identity as they're elite on 2-point defense, but when it comes to Nebraska, we know they can shoot it. You got a guy like Price Samford that can absolutely light it up. You got Rink Mass that can step out from the 3 and hit it. And then for UC Irvine, they struggle from 3. I truly just believe that Nebraska is going to win their first ever NCAA tournament game this year, but I think this is a really good matchup for the Cornhuskers, so I have them advancing as the 3 seed. Then we got Wisconsin taking on Texas. You got Nick Boyd, you got John Blackwell for Wisconsin, also Nolan Winter on the interior. Then for Texas, Dalen Swain obviously is the big name. You got Jordan Pope, Chindell Weaver. You also have Matas Vokatitis down on the interior. I think this would be a really good matchup between a Big Ten team and an SEC team, but I do think Wisconsin, they just have the better wins this season. Wisconsin was able to beat Florida. Texas was not. You also have Wisconsin that went on the road and beat Michigan, probably the best win of the season so far. They've been able to do a lot of really good things there with the Badgers, so I got Wisconsin winning this one and moving on to the second round. They'll be taking on either Houston or Portland State. Houston went on that 3-game losing streak against some of the top teams in the Big 12, but was able to turn it around against Colorado and get a huge win. I think that's going to give some confidence for this Houston team, although what I have thought about this Houston team has definitely been hurt from that 3-game losing streak. I don't think it affects them here against Portland State, so I got the Cougars advancing to the second round. Jumping back to the top where we see Michigan taking on NC State. As I've mentioned, NC State's been struggling recently. However, they do have a really good offense, and I think if they're hitting shots, they will be able to stay in the game for Michigan, but they would have to be hitting shots for a full 40 minutes, and that's just not something I think they're going to do. We saw what they did against Duke at home. Were not able to pull it out, actually ended up getting blown out. Michigan played Duke close, and I think Michigan's front court would absolutely eat NC State alive, who is not have the biggest size when you got Darion Williams starting at your 4 and then Vin Allen Lubin as your 5. So Michigan, too big, too powerful, and also just too good. It's going to beat Will Wade and the Wolfpack and move on to the Sweet 16. Well, they'll be taking on Virginia or Liberty. I think this matchup is where Liberty's size is going to hurt them. Virginia has a guy in Tice DeRitter. They have Johan Grunlow. They also have Onyesu, who comes off the bench. Really good interior players for Virginia. And then also when it comes to shooting, you got a guy like Jakari White. You got a Malik Thomas. And then they have good guard play in Chance Mallory and Dallin Hall. I know it was a really bad look for Virginia against Duke, but I think in this matchup, it wouldn't be that difficult and they'd be able to get the win and move on to the Sweet 16. Then North Carolina versus Nebraska. The more I look at this game, the more I like it. I think it would be some really good matchups. I obviously love Caleb Wilson. You got Henry Vasar going up against a guy like Rink Mass for Nebraska. Price Samford could be an X factor in this one with his shooting and his ability to stretch the defense. I also love Sam Hoiberg on the defensive end. And North Carolina doesn't necessarily have the best guards. You got a Seth Trimble. You have a Derek Dixon who seems like he's stepping up time and time again. But I trust what Nebraska has in the backcourt a little more, so I'm going to be picking Nebraska to advance in this one. And then Wisconsin versus Houston. Wisconsin just seems to beat the top teams whenever they play them, like I've mentioned with Michigan and Florida, but I don't think they're going to do it to Houston. I think Houston gets the win and advances. I think Kingston Flemings, the guard play, also just the experience from Emmanuel Sharp, Milos Uzan, and JoJo Tugler in these types of situations. I think that would be too much, and they'd be able to power past the Badgers in this one. Then Elite Eight, we got Michigan versus Virginia, and then we have Nebraska versus Houston. So all chalk your 1, 2, 3, and 4 seeds. And in the first matchup between Michigan and Virginia, it's going to be much of the same. I'm sticking with the chalk. Michigan has looked like one of, if not the best teams in all of college basketball this season, and I just have to be picking Michigan in this one to advance and move on to the Elite Eight. It just has been too dominant. But one big new piece of news for Michigan is the season-ending injury to backup guard LJ Kaysen, who has been critical in some of their big wins when guys like Elliot Cadeau haven't been performing to the level that they need. So this is something that could hinder Michigan, but up to this point, I don't think it will. So I have them advancing to the Elite Eight. I also think that size could be difficult for Virginia to handle, even though they do have good size themselves. Then Nebraska taking on Houston. I honestly think that this would be a really good game. What Nebraska has done this season has been incredible. And Houston, I thought they were a little better than what they've shown recently. And I think I'm actually going with Nebraska in this one to get a rematch from the Big Ten. I love what Fred Hoiberg has done with this team so far. I think this team plays great team basketball. Houston also, the front court, I don't think it would punish a Nebraska team. And so Nebraska also plays solid defense. If they're able to contain guys like Kingston Flemings and Emmanuel Sharp, I think this Houston team could struggle to score, and Nebraska will be able to score just a little more and get the win. So I got the Cornhuskers advancing to the Elite Eight. Well, they'll have a rematch against Michigan, and although they try their best, Michigan once again gets the win and advances to the Final Four. Moving down to our last region, which is the West region, we have our number 1 overall seeded Arizona Wildcats taking on Tennessee State. And much like the same, Arizona's going to get the win in this one. They've been too dominant, one of the best and most consistent teams the entire season. But then we have Clemson taking on Missouri, two teams that were up in this week's bracketology, up a seed line. Clemson was struggling there in the middle of ACC play, but has since bounced back, although they did just take a loss to North Carolina. Then you have Missouri, who also was struggling there for a little bit, but then played themselves into the bubble, and now it looks like safely into the field, although they recently took a loss as well. However, I am going to be picking Missouri. I just like what they have, not only in the backcourt, but in the front court, a little more than Clemson. Missouri with Mark Mitchell, I think, gets the job done and advances to the second round over the Clemson Tigers. Then we have St. John's taking on Belmont. St. John's has been really up and down recently. They were on one of the longest winning streaks in the country until they went to UConn and got absolutely demolished by the Huskies. But then they bounced back against Villanova, which is the third best team in the Big East, and absolutely demolished them. Then you got Belmont, who is one of the best offensive teams, offensive mid-major teams for sure. They're number 1 in effective field goal percentage in the entire country. They're also an elite shot blocking team, and they're big for a mid-major roster, which is something that I think is going to be crucial in this matchup with St. John's, who likes to get on the interior and isn't necessarily the best from outside. You got a guy like Tyler Lundblade, who's averaging roughly 15 points per game. Drew Sharnowski, who is a huge threat there on the interior. They can all shoot it seems like. And I think, honestly, they are someone that can get a win in the first round in the NCAA tournament, and this could be a really good matchup for them because this St. John's team isn't necessarily known for how they shoot the ball, and obviously Belmont, if they can get hot and shoot well from deep and then also limit St. John's on the interior, they have a chance to get this upset. And so I think I'm going to be going with it and give me the Bruins to get the first round win over St. John's and move on to the second round where they'll be taking on either Alabama or High Point. High Point is another mid-major that I'm looking at as upset potential. I really like them, but Alabama, besides that recent loss to Georgia that they just took, had been playing awesome, have been playing themselves higher and all the way up to a 4 seed now. I think the Crimson Tide not only had one of the toughest strength of schedules, so they played really hard teams, but they also have looked like one of the better teams in the SEC. We know what they do from an offensive perspective, run and gun, really fast paced, shoot a lot of threes. I think High Point has a capability if Alabama does not shoot it well, but I think Alabama's size could be a little bit of an issue for High Point, so I got the Crimson Tide advancing. Then we got Kentucky taking on Miami, Ohio, and the Red Hawks out of Miami, Ohio just keep winning. They are one regular season win away from going undefeated in the regular season, and I think that cements their spot in the NCAA tournament no matter what happens in the conference tournament if they end undefeated. But they'll be taking on a Kentucky team that has been up and down. We know this team, it has talent, but really hasn't shown it in full force yet. Is that something I think we're going to see in March? I don't think it's going to be a complete 180 like probably most Wildcat fans hope, but going up against a Miami, Ohio team that isn't necessarily the biggest, so I think Kentucky could use its size with a guy like Malachi Moreno, Diabate, Garrison. Some of their bigs, I think, could have their way if they really wanted to in this one. I guess the biggest question is if they're actually going to take advantage of it. Also, Miami, Ohio, been dealing with some injuries recently as well. So I am going to be picking Kentucky and not Miami, Ohio in this one. But I do think Miami, Ohio is better than what a lot of people give them credit for. I know they don't have the toughest strength of schedule by any means, but a team that's able to go undefeated through the regular season, that's still a really good team and deserves to be in the NCAA tournament, in my opinion. So although I'm not picking Miami, Ohio, I do think this would be a great matchup. Then we have Kansas taking on Navy. Navy absolutely has dominated their conference, and if they don't win the conference tournament, that's going to be really upsetting to me. But taking on a Kansas team that right now seems like they're going a bit in the wrong direction, just took another loss this past week, and Darren Peterson, when he's in the lineup, they have all the capability and the talent in the world, but right now it seems like they're not gelling and putting it all together. I think they get the win in this first round matchup, but I am a little off on the Jayhawks right now, and it's a bit concerning while we're heading into the Big 12 tournament and then ultimately heading into March Madness, but I still have them getting the win and advancing to the round of 32. Then we have St. Mary's taking on SMU. St. Mary's got their biggest win of the season by far against Gonzaga this past week, and I think that's huge for them. Obviously, Gonzaga leaving the WCC and heading to the Pac-12. Really cool to see the Gales get the win in their final regular season game against the Zags, but I'm assuming we're going to see them play once again in the WCC championship. But with the way that Mikey Lewis played, dropping over 30 points on the Zags, also they were able to shut down Gonzaga offensively in the second half. I think St. Mary's might be a little better than I expected. Again, they also have a guy like Paulius Morauskas on that team. I also like the point guard Dent for St. Mary's. I think they get the win over Boopy Miller and SMU and move on to the second round. We'll take on either Illinois or ETSU. Illinois have been struggling, but just got a big bounce back win against Oregon. 26-point win for the Fighting Illini, which is something they need. If you see analytically, they have the best or one of the best offenses in the country. So I think a team like ETSU is not going to be able to keep up with them. I got the Illini advancing. Then jumping back to the top where we see Arizona taking on Missouri. I got the Wildcats winning once again. Missouri, I like that they've made it into the NCAA tournament in this one and then got them moving to the second round. But Braden Burries honestly looks like the best player on Arizona right now. He has surpassed Koa Pete and Jaden Bradley to me. I think Karchenkov is going to have a really big March, and I think a lot of people are going to know his name. Got a guy like Del Orso who's coming off the bench, Toby Owaka, Motius Krivas. This team has size, they have skill, they can shoot it when they need to, but honestly, most of the time they don't, so they just get downhill and get to the line and score at will, it seems. Arizona just seems like they're destined for a special season, and I had them advancing into the Sweet 16 in this one. That's when we got our matchup, Belmont for Alabama. And don't sleep on this Belmont team. I think this team can not only win in the first round, I think even in this matchup specifically, they have potential to win and go to the Sweet 16, especially if this Alabama team does not shoot the ball well. That's what makes this Alabama team so hard, is you have to predict how well they're going to shoot it, because obviously we've seen when they shoot it lights out, they can beat anyone, but when they don't, they can struggle. So in this one, I think Alabama, they definitely don't have necessarily a size advantage against this Belmont team, but they do have an athleticism advantage, I believe. I think LeBaron Philon, this is a game where he's going to have the ability and the chance to take over for the Tide. And then you also have all of your snipers around with Latrell Reitzel, Aiden Holloway, Houston Millette. You also have a guy like Amari Allen, who's just a workhorse on the interior there at the wing spot for him. I think Alabama just has a bit too much talent and a bit too much athleticism, and they'll get past Belmont, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Bruins won this game. Then Kentucky taking on Kansas. Honestly, right now with the way both of these teams are playing, I don't necessarily like anyone in this matchup, but if I'm having to pick a team, I'm going to be picking the team that has Darren Peterson on it. Also, I think Flory Badunga would be the best big in the game. Melvin Council might be the best point guard in the game. I just think Kansas has a bit more talent than Kentucky has right now, or at least what they've shown. So I have the Jayhawks advancing. Then we got St. Mary's taking on Illinois. These would be two completely different styles of play, although St. Mary's is playing a lot faster under Randy Bennett this season than we've ever seen them before. They're definitely not at the pace or at the offensive caliber that Illinois is. I think Keaton Wagler, he's cooled off a bit, but if we remember what he was doing in the middle of the season, I think he has the chance to do that same thing in March. And I believe the size of Illinois with the Avicic twins, with Markovic, could give St. Mary's some issues. So I got Illinois advancing. Back to the top of the Sweet 16, where we see Arizona and Alabama. I just feel like I have to go with Arizona. The consistency that they bring night in and night out, the way that even though they lost back-to-back, they've been able to turn around and get big wins time and time again, and it seems. This Wildcats team is definitely a contender and something not to mess with, and I believe they'd be able to shut Alabama down. Then Kansas taking on Illinois. Illinois right now, I know they just got a big win, but they have been struggling recently. But then you got a Kansas team that seems like it's been a roller coaster past couple of weeks. So I am going to be sticking with Illinois. I think Illinois' offense is slightly better than Kansas, and I think truly Kansas has not gelled as a team with Darren Peterson in the lineup yet. And if they make the Sweet 16, maybe that means that they've gelled, but I think Illinois has the higher potential, so I'm going with the Illini to advance to the Elite Eight. And then in the Elite Eight matchup between Arizona and Illinois, I think this would be similar to what we saw with Illinois and Michigan, where Michigan just went into Illinois and absolutely dominated. I think Arizona has that potential, so I got the Wildcats advancing to the Final Four. Now jumping over to our Final Four, where we have Duke taking on Florida and Michigan taking on Arizona. And honestly, right now in the country, I believe these are the four best teams, and these are the four teams that are playing the best heading into March, it seems. And truly, if we want to see the best matchups, I think this might be it. So in our first matchup, we see a rematch of John Shire and the Duke Blue Devils taking on Todd Golden and the Florida Gators. And in that first one, we saw Duke win at Cameron Indoor, so at home, by a single point. And that was even with a Florida team that was not playing their best yet. Xavier Lee, Boogie Flan in that backcourt had not got it going specifically like they have recently. And I also think the front court wasn't at full strength either when it comes to the way they've been playing recently. But much for the same, honestly, for Duke. I think Duke has progressed a lot from that point. I think this team is playing a lot better. They're getting a lot more contributions from their bench as well. So honestly, I believe this would just be such a good matchup, and one I would love to see again, especially on a neutral court. If we had to replay that matchup right now, looking at the front court, obviously you have probably the National Player of the Year on the Duke side with Cameron Boozer. Then you got Patrick Ngungba, who's going to get drafted. For Florida, you have Thomas Houck, you got Alex Condon, Ruben Chinyelu, Micah Hanlogden off the bench. For Duke, you obviously have Malik Brown off the bench. I think this would be a battle in the front court, and honestly, looking at them, I'm going to say it's a wash. So then we go to the back court. That's when we have Boogie Flan, Xavier Lee, Urban Clavzar for the Gators. You got a Caleb Foster, a Caden Boozer, and Isaiah Evans for Duke. But I think Duke just has a few more pieces that they can go to. It can get hot. You have a guy like Nicholas Homenia, who has played some really solid minutes at times. You got a Darren Harris, who has come in and had some really big games recently for Duke. So I think in this one, I'm going with Duke to get the win again. But this is another game that's going to be decided by a single possession. I completely believe that. So I think you can't go wrong either here. But right now, I think Duke is the best team in the country, but Florida might be a close second. But then jumping to the other side, that's where you got Michigan and Arizona, and Michigan might also be the best team in the country or a close second to Duke, because we did see the Blue Devils win in that head-to-head. They're taking on an Arizona team, and when you look at this one, I think Michigan has the better front court because you got Yaxel Lindenborg, Morez Johnson Jr., you got Ade Mara, and then Arizona, they have a Kobe P, they'll have a Toby Awaka, Modius Krivas, but I do like Michigan's slightly more. But then when you look at the backcourt, this is where I think it favors Arizona. Braden Burries, Jaden Bradley, a Karchinkov on the wing, and Anthony Delorso off the bench. I think that's a better core than what you have with a Namari Burnett, a Roddy Gale, and an Elliot Cadeau, especially now that LJ Kaysen is injured and no longer going to be with the team. And I think that benefits Arizona. And for that reason alone, I'm actually going to pick Arizona to win because I think LJ Kaysen is a very important piece for this team. I think most other teams would not even have a chance to make it to the Final Four if a guy like LJ Kaysen got hurt on their team. But because Michigan is so talented and their front court can do so much, and a guy like Yaxel Lindenborg can play point forward, I think they can get him here. But when you're going up against a team like Arizona, I think you need to be fully healthy. And in this one, I got the Wildcats winning. But again, I think that's another team in another game that's going to be decided by a single possession. So then for our championship, this is where we see Duke taking on Arizona. Obviously, best team in the ACC going up against the best team in the Big 12. And in this one, I think it's another game that's decided by a single possession. But I do like what Duke has a little more than Arizona. So I'm going with Duke. They weren't able to get the win last year with Cooper Flagg, Con Knipple, Kamal Malawach, Tyrese Proctor, Sion James, and all of them. And that was probably the best team in the country. I believe this team might also be the best team in the country. And I think Jon Scheyer gets his first ever national championship, and the Duke Blue Devils are the ones grabbing the trophy and raising it at the end of March Madness if it were to happen today. But that wraps it up for today's video. Let me know your thoughts on this week's bracketology update and my predictions if the NCAA tournament were to start today in the comments down below. Let me know also what your Final Four would. Honestly, this just looks like the best 4 teams in the country. Also, if you enjoy the content, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching and all your support, and I'll see you in the next one.